Welcome everyone to the Racist War. We are currently on episode 213, and you are joined by Athenian and by Nolsey. Is all your stuff working there, Nolsey?
I fucking hope it is.
Okay, that's good. You're coming through pretty clearly. So, guys, welcome to the show, and I hope you had a good Easter, good break and everything. We're getting right back into the swing of the news cycle, and some pretty big news in the last week in terms of the Australian relationship or relation to the Israel-Gaza situation. I am, of course, referring to the death of an Australian citizen who was killed in an Israeli airstrike. But look, before we get on to examining that story, I just wanted to inform people about a new Jewish group that is, as the
exactly
way
what we needed. Another fucking one.
Yeah, this is a new Australian Jewish council. So they've actually just called themselves Jewish Council of Australia. And they have admitted, this is not surprising at all, that they are a product of the current Israel-Gaza situation. Conflict. I don't like calling it a war because I don't see how you could really call this a war. You know,
there's only one side to this fucking thing.
Right. That's it. Yeah. So I mean, calling it a war is kind of silly. Anyway, this group is made up of progressive Jewish academics, teachers, writers, and lawyers. So they've been set up to be basically a counterweight to what they describe as the predominantly conservative Jewish groups in Australia.
Blood-curdling, warish, hawkish, jignat, basically.
Right.
That's the dominant fear over here.
Yeah, so I mean, with them entering the fray, you've got, your jignats like the ECAJ on the one hand, and, like Australian Jewish News, stuff like that. And then on the other hand, you've got Jewish Council of Australia. Now, there are other, kind of progressive Jewish groups in Australia, but they're not very well known. There was one I remember they were backing the Yes campaign, for example, but they're not really that big. This one plans to kind of change that and to actually be a genuine alternative.
Yeah, so this is the other. This is they're basically setting themselves up to be the other side of the Shia. And it's solely because if you look at Jewish media in Australia right now, it's all completely fucking heinous coverage of what's going on in Israel and Gaza. It's gloating about killing civilians and etc. And it's just not stomachable to any fucking sane population.
Right. So look, just before I comment on that, I'll just say that I think it is true that for the Australian situation, that Jews have aligned themselves more with the conservative right in Australia, as opposed to, say, in America, where you have I believe it's still about 70% of American Jews vote for the Democrats. And of course, also just a longer history of Jewish left-wing radicals as well. There was a lot of communist Reds under the beds. When you heard about the Red Scare, I mean, really, that was just Jews in America. That's really what it was.
And they're right to fucking do it. Nuclear secrets got fucking delivered because of the Red fucking Scare.
Yes, and so but in other countries it's been different. In Britain as well, Jews are again aligned to the conservative right, mainly. Obviously, we know that Jews aren't a monolith in that they differ on how to best advance the Jewish people. That's really what they're arguing about.
That's the only dialectic. Try and get in on that dialectic yourself, and just watch them all turn on you, left and right.
Right, and that's exactly what we're seeing here with the establishment of this new group. This new group is not saying, okay, we oppose the ECAJ's support of Jewish interests. No, what we're saying instead is that the ECAJ is going about it the wrong way, and we believe we have it the right way.
Can you stop speaking and acting like Bronze Age genocidal fox, and can we put this back on the slow boil?
Yeah. So that's one thing is, basically they want to see a ceasefire eventually negotiated in Gaza. They also singled out, like I said, they did single out the ECAJ, but in particular their adoption of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
I'm sure most people are familiar with that, where like you're not allowed to criticize Israel, but you also can't say that like Jews are responsible for Israel. Real weird, like kind of
Have my
catch-all.
cake. Have my cake, eat it too, and also
Mutating,
prosecute you.
right. It's that mutating definition. So the Jewish Council of Australia says, no, we don't support that because that stifles free speech on campus. But really, I think what they mean is we think this goes too far and makes people think of, speech codes when they think of Jewish power. We just want to police what you say. And
Which
yeah,
they
they'd be
do.
right. They do. Of course they do. So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see. I'll certainly be watching out for this group and what they say, the kind of media that they do. It's led by Sarah Schwartz and Elizabeth Strakosch. And
Oh God.
the people involved are all said to be mid-30s to early 40s. So, they're a bit of a younger crowd as well. So,
Yeah.
okay, so let's talk about the aid worker that was killed. I don't know if I'm saying her name correctly. Zomi Frankcom, very unusual name.
Very
My
weird looking
understanding is,
person too.
yeah, well, she's a half Pajit.
Yeah.
She, I forget which parent is from India, but basically one white Aussie and one Indian parent. Apparently, she spent some time living in India, and when she saw the contrast between the poverty in India and the relative wealth in Australia, she felt some kind of a calling to get into aid work and attempt to alleviate poverty around the world. So she was actually stationed in many different countries, and then she eventually, of course, ended up in Gaza.
It's one of those things. Like I travel the world a lot. I've seen peoples of all stripes, and you can either come to like two conclusions. And obviously, I believe that the conclusion she came to was probably driven by some level of racial animus. But you can either say like, oh look, this place is like how it is because of the people who live there, or you could come up with some mega contrived system of like constant and perpetual theft that puts these people down.
Right. I mean, look, in the case of Gaza, it's obvious that poverty is mainly caused by the brutal neighbor, and that's obvious and plain to see. It's not like one of those cases where you can just blame colonialists because they came to your country and actually made it better. This is a case of actually leveling your country. Which
Israel didn't come into Palestine and build roads and railways and build up infrastructure. No, they came, they put up walls, and they kicked you out of your fucking house.
Yeah, it's really that simple.
Oh, and blew you up. But that's going back to this aid worker.
Yeah, going back to the aid worker. So, look, she was killed in an Israeli airstrike. It hit, I believe it was a van. So they killed, I think, if I'm remembering this correctly, there was 3 aid workers, 2 people who were their security detail, and then a driver. Something like that.
It was an aid convoy. Israel absolutely positively knew it was an aid convoy because these things have to be registered. And there was markings all over these vehicles detailing what exactly humanitarian society they were from.
Yeah.
So do not believe for a hot fucking second that this was a mistake.
Not for a second. By the way, on the roof of the van where the strike penetrated, you can still actually see the logo of the company, or the NGO, I should say. You can actually see it.
It wasn't like, oh god, we fired a salvo of unguided missiles and like it just happened, maybe something wrong happened, blah blah blah. No, this was a fucking FPV grenade drone that did this.
Yeah, and also I don't think I need to put the case here that, Israel deliberately does things like target aid workers and ambulances and hospitals and all that kind of stuff. But something new that I just heard is that these aid groups are saying that, it got to the stage where they were so afraid of Israeli attacks that they would basically provide GPS coordinates to the IDF around the clock, like whenever any of their vehicles were to move, they would inform the IDF so they knew exactly where they were. And they are still saying, even giving that intelligence to the Israelis has resulted in airstrikes on aid vehicles. Right? So actually what they were doing was giving them the precise coordinates to hit. That's what they ended up actually doing in the end. Foolishly thinking that they would actually be humane enough to let them go. So
again, you have to remember you're dealing with a people whose morality hasn't evolved since the fucking Bronze Age. They're still in the mindset of killing the other tribe. How brutal and how fucking godless they have to be.
And now this is starting to kind of reach the normie, because even the people who are not all that politically engaged, looking at something like this and say, what? They did an airstrike on an aid vehicle and killed 6 or 7 completely innocent people, 3 of which who were trying to actually deliver aid to Gazans who are starving. It's not very good PR, which, again, is like, this is why they're trying to set up, or they are setting up organizations like the Jewish Council of Australia to sort of push back on this extremely bad PR that, the Jignat conservative right has been complicit in. And let's give you some examples now of what I'm talking about in terms of the complicity of the right, or the mainstream right media. I put a few graphics in my prep this time. I was watching Sky News yesterday. Right. So look, this title of this video that Andrew Bolt is on, this is on the Sky News channel on YouTube, is Israel deserves credit. Israel deserves credit for disclosure of Gaza strikes on aid workers. Right?
Yeah.
And then if you read the text on the screen, it says Bolt, Israel's success in war on terror ignored. So
go die. Just like go crawl in a hole and fucking die.
Yeah. So look, I did watch this video. It's with a retired American general, and the quote of credit that actually came from him. He said that Israel deserves credit because as soon as the attack happened, they issued the briefing in detail to the Australian government and apologized and announced an investigation. And then he just said, well, can you imagine us doing that?
Oh, no, by the way, you saw fucking Netanyahu's delivery of this quote-unquote apology, which it wasn't, by the way. It basically was him just saying, whoopsie, haha, whoopsie. Like, he was literally laughing and grinning during the entire fucking his presentation of that.
There's more of that Jignat PR, bad PR.
Yeah.
Right there.
Dude, people were fucking seething about it. I was fucking walking around with some people yesterday. They turned around saying like, "Oh, like I used to think that you were really fucking hard on these people, but I'm looking at how they're dealing with one of our dead nationals, and I'm starting to think you were fucking right all along." And I was like, "Well, took you long enough, buddy."
Yeah. So look, they also had an interview with Alexander Downer, the former foreign minister, and he basically said this, and I've heard this from other commentators too, that it basically does not matter what Israel does during this conflict at all. They can do absolutely anything, and no matter what, Hamas are still to blame because of October 7. That's effectively what he said. It's effectively what the general said, and it's just the mantra of Sky News at the moment was, okay, Hamas started this, therefore they are ultimately responsible for everything that comes after it.
And by the way, if you think they fucking did, they didn't.
Right, well, of course. But
we could backdate this all the way back to the fucking middle of the last century. But we got the fucking receipts.
This has to be absolute desperation at that point, because they no longer can justify these individual acts of barbarism that the IDF are committing. So their only fallback is just to say, oh, well, remember who started it. That's it.
And that's not going to fucking work for most people. Anything.
Yeah, and most people are not going to accept that kind of logic because it's not fucking logic.
It's disgusting.
So here's another one. Here was a tweet from Sky News Australia. Too many are jumping on the bandwagon of pointing the finger at Israel for the mistaken airstrike that killed 7 aid workers, including one Australian. On Monday, instead of Hamas, who started this war and continue to maximize civilian deaths. So there it is right there. Because they started it, and apparently they're continuing to maximize civilian deaths. Are they?
Really?
Like who?
Is this coming from the fucking people in refugee centers?
Hospitals? The Israeli death count since October 7 has really only been a handful of IDF soldiers. That's it.
Yeah.
None of them are civilians, so far as I know.
They basically their entire rave situation got BTFO'd when someone leaked the fucking gunship footage of that one IDF gunship just like mowing down the crowd.
Yeah,
like that just got shot in the foot. They don't even talk about that anymore.
Right. So look, let's also now these were sent to me online. They're all written in Hebrew, so obviously I can't read them. But there were posts on Israeli social media by Israelis who were posting photographs of the dead woman, of the dead Australian.
Yep, that's a passport.
Yeah. So they got her body and they opened her passport, put it on her body, and photographed it. This has been shared on social media with, I can't read what the comments are, but I think it's quite obvious that they are celebrating, if not mocking, this person's death.
Let's look at the Telegram reacts. What's the biggest one? What's the biggest Telegram react on that fucking image?
Oh yeah, the laughing face.
Yeah, the laughing while crying, like fucking the ruffle emoji. So what do you think's being said there? I can probably put 2 and 2 together. I'm not exactly the world's best detective.
Yeah, I mean. And what's sick also about this is that I think this is what that US that former general said, which is that look, the Israelis apologized, whereas when Hamas go and kill an innocent person, they celebrate it. Well, what's going on here then with this innocent person? Obviously, innocent person. The Israelis are celebrating it. Okay, now of course they won't do that in the mainstream media. They won't have their politicians saying it. They're absolutely doing it among themselves on social media. And I've no doubt that Bibi is doing it behind closed doors.
Oh, yeah.
Jews are experts at sort of like switching modes. They know that there's certain things you can't say. You have to tell noble lies in public and hide what you really think. So, yeah. And while this is going on, you've got the Australian newspaper. They just did like a write-up on this woman. I'd never even heard of her before, called Deborah Conway. She is a Jewish singer-songwriter, and she has been staunchly supporting Israel during this conflict, and she's mixing that into her music. And that has apparently resulted in online abuse. Wow. Well, I'm sorry. If you take any kind of political stand, and particularly if you're a celebrity, even though I'd never heard of her, well, you got to cop some shit, and I think that is fair enough. And the Jewish lobby are the ones who organise those letter campaigns where people write to TV stations and editorial boards and demand the sacking of an employee. That doesn't really happen on the Israeli side. On the Palestinian side. However, you do have this one woman. Her name is Randa Abdel Fattah. She's an academic at Macquarie University. She's on the board of some judging panel at the moment. It's something to do with the university. I can't remember. But she is apparently one of the people responsible for the doxed 600 Jewish creatives. We remember them.
Oh, yeah.
Basically now you've got Mark Dreyfus moving to make the act of doxing illegal, with, a hell of a lot of caveats added to it, because, I'm sure they want to keep doxing white nationalists.
Doxing is illegal for you, Goyam.
Yes, that's exactly what it's going to be. But anyway, Dave Sharma now is leading the call to have this woman dumped from that judging panel. And look, I don't know, but I can absolutely guarantee that you've got organised jury penning letters to the university and whatever else. Once they find you, you're fair game. And
Put the shiksa on the Goyam exploding machine.
Absolutely, definitely. All right. Anything else on that before we move on to Brittany Higgins?
No, it's just fucking disgusting, as per usual. I love living in Hell Earth.
No. I will say, though, in terms of, awakening Australians specifically to the JQ, there's a silver lining there. That is happening now. And it's not just radical Muslims or whatever who are seeing it. The average person is beginning to see it now. Okay, now, we actually haven't talked about Brittany Higgins for a while. I was saving the stories. I was going to maybe do an episode just on her, but with what's been going on lately, we really have to cover it now. So, just so you know, there are currently 2 defamation cases going on at the moment regarding this whole debacle. One of them is Bruce Lehrmann suing Channel 10 and Lisa Wilkinson because of her Logie speech that, yes, defamed him. I certainly believe that. And then the other one was Linda Reynolds, the former Perth senator. She is suing David Shiraz, the boyfriend of Brittany Higgins. Well, actually, I think he might be the husband now, and Brittany Higgins herself. And these were to do with various defamatory posts on social media. I believe mainly Twitter, or X, as it's called now. So just quickly on the little...
Oh, right, call it my little freak cage.
Yeah.
That's my new term for Twitter. My little freak cage. It's a cage where I stole all my freaks so I can poke them with a stick for entertainment.
Yeah. So look, Linda Reynolds one, I'll just get that out of the way first. There's not that much to tell about it. They had actually been undergoing mediation sessions in Perth, because that's where Linda Reynolds is from. And they'd lined it up with a registrar there who was apparently the best negotiator we've got in the state. They said that if she can't reach a mediation, out of court settlement, then no one can. Well, she failed. So even though this went on, I believe, for a number of days, they ultimately could not reach a conclusion. So therefore, this case is going ahead right here in WA, I believe. So another one to get the popcorn out over. Okay, let's talk about the one, though, that is certainly more interesting, at least for the time being. So the case had actually finished. The trial, or whatever you want to call it, had finished regarding Lehrmann's defamation suit against Lisa Wilkinson and Channel 10, and it was just reopened. So a submission was made to reopen the case in light of new evidence that Channel 10 was claiming to have. That new evidence comes from someone who is a disgruntled producer from Channel 7 who was involved in the Spotlight interview that was conducted with Bruce Lehrmann. If you don't know what that is, that's basically the only piece of mainstream media that was somewhat on Bruce Lehrmann's side. Everything else, like all the other crap that you saw on The Project and whatever, was always just kind of taking Brittany Higgins' word for granted and just assuming that Lehrmann was guilty.
It wasn't even positive. It's more like, this piece of media coverage was actually kind of fucking neutral.
Yeah, that's why I say it was only somewhat kind to him, But nonetheless, he would have been grateful for it, I think, on the whole. Anyway, this guy, his name is Taylor Orbach. I might be saying that wrong, but so like I said, former producer from Channel 7, and he was involved in the production of this episode of Spotlight. Now, he has made some really bizarre, out there claims about all of this. And he did so with statements given to the court and under cross-examination. Now, what has he actually claimed here? He said that it was his job to bring Lehrmann on board to kind of, spill his guts the best he could to Channel 7 and grant them exclusive access to himself. Like, he wasn't going to talk to any other media. It was just going to be a Channel 7 thing. So they're saying that on the a night where he brought him out in an attempt to, sort of butter him up for the interview, they ended up at a Thai massage parlor, which, means hookers, means happy endings and all that. He claims that Lehrmann ordered a bag of cocaine, and they said when they returned to the hotel room, Lehrmann started Googling prostitutes to order. And he also then claimed that all of those expenses were invoiced to Channel 7, and Channel 7 paid them. Now, Channel 7 have denied that. Also, when he was under cross-examination, Orbach was not able to provide any evidence. Although, just before I started the show today, I was reading that an invoice has now been presented to the court that allegedly shows the payments for the drugs and the sex workers and, everything else for the night. Okay, now, do I believe any of this? No, I don't. Let me tell you a couple of things about Taylor Orbach. First of all, the reason why he's a former producer of Channel 7 is because they didn't renew his contract. In other words, he was fired. He has openly admitted, he admitted this in court, that while he doesn't hate Channel 7 as a brand or as a corporation, he does hate the superiors that he was working with. And I guess why wouldn't he? They sacked him. Now, he has claimed that he underwent bullying and harassment while he was there. He also claimed that he was the victim of anti-Semitism. Okay, so yes, Taylor is Jewish and has claimed that he was racially vilified for being a Jew by Channel 7.
I don't think anyone there's stupid enough to do that.
To do what? To
racially vilify for being Jewish.
Right, okay. Well, there's also, I encourage people to go and find this video.
This one.
There's a video of this Taylor Orbach guy apparently in possession of one of his boss's set of golf clubs, and he videotapes himself smashing
going to town. Going to fucking town and gloating about it. What the fuck?
Yeah, and he pulls angry grr faces at the camera and stuff as he's breaking them.
It's putting them in front of the camera and just bending them. You sent me the link to that video, and I didn't have a fucking response to it. I was like, what the fuck am I looking at?
Yeah, well, you're looking at this producer that Channel 10 is now relying on evidence for. So there's no doubt that this guy has a few screws loose. There's no doubt that he is not just a former employee of Channel 7, he is a disgruntled former employee, and disgruntled is putting it very, very mildly. I think he actually did say that he even hates his bosses. So I just don't buy that this guy could possibly have any credibility. And I also don't think that Channel 7 would have been foolish enough to actually pay for prostitutes and drugs. I mean, surely that would end up surfacing at some point. So they wouldn't have been that stupid. We were supposed to actually get a verdict on the defamation trial by next week. You're not going to get it now. No way. Even if everything this guy has said is bullshit, which it probably is, nonetheless, the judge does have to consider it and investigate it, examine it. So we're maybe, another month off or so. And who knows, Channel 10 might file another motion to have the case reopened in light of new evidence. We just don't know. So, yeah, it's very bizarre what's going on here. Very, very weird.
It's more freak shit. More freak shit.
Okay, so let's move on to immigration. And so, of course, last week we covered that the new kind of draconian emergency laws, as they've been labelled by like the Greens, did not pass the Senate. They did pass the House. They're going to be subject to a Senate inquiry for the next month or so to kind of put it under greater scrutiny. Both Andrew Giles and Anthony Albanese, I guess somewhat surprisingly, have said that they don't want to water these laws down at all, which, could be a bit difficult because they may have to do that. Now, it is a bit weird for, you could say, the coalition to oppose them because, they want to sort of present themselves as the toughest on Australian borders, at least when it comes to illegal immigration, which is really what this is all about, by the way. It's, just like when it comes to Border Patrol, the Border Force and that, this is just to do with people who, say, can get around the court system, because it specifically relates to an Iranian guy who claims that he's bisexual. So this is the court case that is before the High Court, I believe, at the moment. And
bisexual. Can you fuck this man right here in front of me?
Yeah, well, look, this guy's story has like changed numerous times. But like the one that is mentioned the most is the claim that he'll be persecuted for being a bisexual man in Iran.
No, you won't. They'll pay for your SSRI. Also, your sexual reassignment surgery.
Yeah, but if you look at what this guy has filed in court, like there's all these inconsistencies. So what was filed in court says that he is stateless, undocumented, converted to Christianity, and is Kurdish. Kurds being, apparently a persecuted minority in Iran. However, he had previously told authorities that he was an Iranian citizen rather than stateless and undocumented, that he left the country for economic reasons, not because of persecution. And they also found an Iranian driver's license in his possession, again showing that he could not have been undocumented. How the hell would you get a driver's license? So, even though he said, yeah, I left for economic reasons, now he wants to say, well, no, I'm actually like this weird Christian Kurd bisexual.
Well, some NGO got to him and, gave him the memo card, like, here's the magic words that will allow you to, conduct lawfare in this country until they give up.
Yeah, but look, the bottom line here is not so much that the Australian government is worried about this guy as an individual walking free. It's that if the High Court find in his favour, well, that's a new precedent, and other detainees in the same kind of situation would have to be let free as well.
So we have a lot more bi boys.
Yeah, and remember, when it came to the 149 who were released when indefinite detention was deemed to be illegal, the government was caught off guard. They had no legislation at the ready to kind of preempt that situation. And so this time they want to, they don't want to be caught off guard again. And so that was the attempt by passing what were seen as like pretty harsh emergency laws. And, even when I looked at them, I thought, oh, okay, I'm surprised, like Andrew Giles wants to do this. However, when you look at the number of people who would be subject to those laws, even if this guy were to win this court case, it's like 150 people. It'd be around about the same number as who were released from indefinite detention. So It's not much at all. It's not much at all.
No.
And
we're seeing like 100 times more Indians flooding through on a fucking plane every second.
Yeah, which is what we need to really be worried about. Okay, really repeating myself here, but yeah, illegal immigration is not the problem in this country.
Yep.
Fuck boat people. The people you should be worried about are the ones coming legally by plane. So anyway, I think the Libs will probably end up supporting this, or at least move for an amendment, maybe to even make it tougher. Who knows? But it won't make any difference at the end of the day. So just one last story on those. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry. 152 is the new number that we've got for the people who were released from indefinite detention. So apparently, out of that 152, and you noticed every week it goes up like a little bit. 73 are not wearing electronic ankle bracelets. So this was something I believe brought up in estimates.
You can have a handful more fucking foreign criminal rapists as a treat every week.
Yeah, well, look, the reason why, this is pretty easy to explain, is that there was going to be another High Court challenge for the people who were in indefinite detention but hadn't actually committed any serious crime. So they're saying, what's the deal? I'm not a sex offender or whatever. Why do I have to wear an ankle bracelet? And so before that actually went to court, Labor removed that requirement because they knew they were going to lose it, basically. Government does that, they're going to lose it. So now they've in this, they're kind of between a rock and a hard place. And they're like, they can't afford to lose another case in the High Court. But at the same time, they can't apply an ankle bracelet to these people who are clearly a threat, and many of whom who have gone on to actually commit further offences in the community since they've been released. So they basically just have to monitor them very closely, and that's all. They can't actually electronically track them.
No granny is safe anywhere.
No. Okay, so let's move on to climate and energy. So I think we did say last week that Chris Bowen is not pushing as hard on the fuel efficiency standards as what he was. That is mainly because Joe Biden decided to go a bit softer on them as well. America being the leader in terms of this unusual scheme that basically makes higher emitting cars more expensive and incentivizes car manufacturers to make more electric vehicles. That's the thrust of it. So look, there was originally a target for 89% of new car sales being electric by 2030. So only 6 years away. Damn, you're almost at 100% at that point in only 6 years. Yeah, I doubt you can do that. So Labor do not currently have a target, but he has simply just said that the 89% figure is not doable right now. Anyone could have told you that, Chris.
Well, there's pretty much only one way of doing that, and that's basically restricting car ownership or the purchasing of a car in the first place to only like the upper middle class and elite. That's actually probably what they're going to do. That seems like the most punishing thing.
Yeah, I mean, look, I still don't doubt, though, that electric cars are going to become cheaper in the long run. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, like, back when I was a libertarian, like, reading Mises, he would always point out that the luxury of today is the necessity of tomorrow. And there's definitely truth in that. I mean, remember the time when no one could afford a computer? Now, basically, everyone has
remember the turn of the millennia where having an internet-capable cell phone was like a luxury item, like having a Bluetooth, BlackBerry was like, oh yeah, you had to be a real high-end businessman to have one of those. And now everyone has like a fucking smart device.
Right. Well, you just have to watch American Psycho, where they're using those giant mobile phones.
Bricks.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it'll happen, but dare I say, you need to actually let market forces play their course here instead of the constant interference that's going on. Not that I'm against interference in the economy or anything, but I'd like the detail to be correct. All of this is just making everything more expensive for us. So Bowen is bragging, though, about apparently there have been 100 new EV charging installations in Australia. Where is that? Over
Remember,
the first.
crackheads, there's a couple kilograms of copper in those things.
Yeah. So apparently, in the last 3 months, they've uh, built about 100 new ones, and that brings up the national number to round about 900 DC fast charging sites across the country.
What about this? The Butlerian Jihad, but instead of like a war against the thinking machines, it's actually just a horde of crackheads selling copper stolen from EV charging centers.
Oh yeah, and Australia has about 3,000 regular charging stations with about 7,000 individual plugs. I don't know all the details of this stuff. I don't drive a bloody Tesla or anything, so I don't get how this stuff works.
Okay. Yeah, there's like rates of charging. I can't remember how many kilowatts the standard one is versus a fast charger, but if you're using the standard one, you're like talking like tens of hours to get a full battery, but if you're using the fast one, you're talking like 3. They're expensive as all fuck. I remember this one story where a gas station owner out in the middle of buttfuck nowhere, America, installed some Tesla fast chargers and then basically had to like say that they were out of order when they weren't, because he was getting charged like fucking $10,000 in electricity just for those things, even though they barely ever got used, just because of how many fucking kilowatts they pull.
And what would be the carbon footprint on that?
Oh, huge.
If it's using that much electricity, I want to know, like, if you were to calculate all that, does a Tesla really result in lower CO2 emissions?
No, there was a quote that Elon Musk put out fucking ages ago where he did the fucking cradle to grave of an internal combustion engine car, and they did like the lifespan of a Tesla, but he didn't compare it to the cradle to grave on a Tesla. And then he basically made the assumption as well that like, oh, it's, most people charge during these, like from data from our Teslas, most people charge during these hours, and then these cities in like Europe, that stuff is like covered by wind farms and solar power plants, and it's like, yeah, but like, where the fuck is the actual market share of those Teslas? Where are they actually, starters? And what's the actual grid usage there? And also disposal. Like, you don't even have a figure for the disposal of your own cars.
Right. I mean, look, it would be a different story if the source of its electricity was coming from nuclear power or something like that.
Yes.
Then you would genuinely be driving a car with zero emissions. But that's certainly not the way it is. Okay. So the recycling tax, as it's come to be called, this is basically where if you're involved in the recycling business in Australia in some capacity, you will be given an extra tax if you send your stuff overseas, and that goes down as to whether or not you're sending it to a landfill or actually for genuine recycling overseas. It doesn't matter. And the reason for that is because, well, the Australian government knows that it just always ends up in a landfill anyway. So,
yep.
So one of the sectors of the economy that is complaining about this is the Australian Tyre Recyclers Association. So they're saying that this would mean an extra $100 fee per container for every container that they have to ship overseas. And they also claim that that is 90% of their market. So you're talking about 90% of their product like smacked with this new tax, which according to them is $100 per container. So needless to say, that would be economically devastating for them. Now, look, they could be exaggerating the numbers and everything. I'm not too sure.
They could be crybabying, yes, but also like how much money do they actually make on a container as well? Because a container full of tires, I know like junk tires, whatever, but a lot of that vulcanized rubber tires are actually recycled. They're one of the very few like petrochemical things that are. But they're mostly just turned into like fucking like replacement bitumen or like fucking pothole sealant.
Okay, and that's like, is that actually cost effective? Like, because you always hear about how it's not very cost effective to recycle glass, for example. Mm-hmm. And even by some measures, they say that like the carbon footprint involved in recycling glass is actually greater than what it would be of actually just manufacturing it from scratch.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much the case with the vast majority of all these materials that we have in a post-industrial world. There's basically only one material where it's not the case, which is aluminium. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes copper. That's just because copper. We basically used up all the high concentrations of copper around the world.
Oh yeah, no, copper's very popular among scavengers, isn't it? Like,
yep.
Yeah, people like cashing that stuff in. All right. So this makes me laugh. The approval for energy projects in Australia in the past 12 months has plummeted. So this was a new report from Infrastructure Partnerships Australia. So it found that Australia's sluggish approval rate for critical green energy projects is creating a $5 billion construction air bubble per quarter. So they're saying billions of dollars is being bogged down by state and federal government's red tape. Now, what I find really funny about this is that the kind of red tape they're talking about is environmental red tape, of course. So when it comes to, say, building some form of green energy infrastructure in the regional areas. And we covered last week about how the government is actually just going to be streamlining those measures. In other words, they're going to be taking away the consultation process with the people who actually live there. You know, the people who will actually have to put up with this fucking shit in their backyard.
Again, what the fuck were we saying last year? These people are just going to be stepped on.
Yeah, they are. They are being stepped on. Yeah. So what the situation that you've actually got here, though, is like years and years of additional green tape, as they very often call it, on developments of land that are pushed by the very same people who are pushing for green energy. It's one of these ideological contradictions. They need green energy to go up as fast as it possibly can so that we can stop relying on fossil fuels. But at the same time, they want to protect the environment with all of these draconian regulations. And guess what? Those same regulations that they advocate for are now getting in their way because they can't get these projects up and going fast enough. So now that doesn't mean that I want to more fast enough. Yeah. Like some of these, when it comes to the surveying of land and stuff like that, like just the nitpicky detail and shit that they demand, that's the kind of stuff I think is bullshit. I definitely do not think that they should be doing away with the consultation process, though. In other words, just ignoring the people who are forced to actually live around all of these, massive wind turbines and everything. So I'm like, all right, we need regulation and red tape, but we need the right kind of stuff here. And we should be taking into account the opinions of people much more than, the flora and fauna that's around. All right. Yeah. What about the bloody people who live around these areas? Oh, here's another example. So traditional owners of a 1,030 square kilometre Southern Ocean offshore wind zone declared by the Albanese government last month have condemned Chris Bowen for a, quote, complete lack of appropriate and meaningful consultation, accusing him of undermining their sovereignty as land right holders. There again, you've got the same kind of thing. Native title, traditional owners of the land, traditional ownership, again, something promoted by environmentalists. And that's getting in the way of their huge wind farms and wind turbines. Now, I can translate this for you, though. These people don't really care about the how meaningful the consultation process is in terms of the disruption to indigenous spirits or culture or whatever. They just didn't get enough money out of it, or at least they did get a lot of money, and then they decided later on that they need to because they pissed it up.
Yeah,
this happens all the time.
Simple solution: bring out the checkbook.
Yeah, which is probably what they'll end up doing. I mean, this is what other mining companies have done, because this is actually a very common tactic. These Aboriginal corporations, as they're called, they make an agreement and they get X amount of money. And then once the project actually starts up, they say, hey, you never told us about this or something. They just make it up. They start doing new projects at the site. And then, the mining company just kind of pays them off just to get rid of them, And why not? I mean, they're incentivized to do so. So, you can't blame them for trying and constantly rent seeking. So,
because it works.
Another story that
it fucking works.
It makes me laugh. It does make me laugh, this stuff, but it's not surprising either. Okay, so the budget is going to come up in about a month. Next month being May, and although Albo is saying, in the lead up to this budget, he's assuring everyone that this is going to be a strictly cost of living budget, because that's what everyone is concerned about, rightly so. But he's also putting an emphasis on this idea that Australia is going to become the leaders in industrial green energy. And he's saying that we're going to become a manufacturing hub for things like wind turbines and solar panels, solar farms, and all of this. So that apparently, when Jim Chalmers hands down the budget, is going to be a centerpiece as well. And they're going to sell it also in terms of fighting cost of living, because apparently this is how we're going to reduce power prices in Australia. This is coming from the same people who promised us 2 years ago for a $275 a week cut to our power prices, and they only went up. So you telling us that you're going to turn Australia into a manufacturing powerhouse for green energy products? Forgive me if I'm a little skeptical about that, lowering my electricity.
We have we have that shit manufactured in China just because of how fucking toxic it is, by the way. And two, no, just fucking no.
Just all of that stuff.
All of it. Talking about fucking the glass. Yes, fucking glass fibers and fucking for the manufacturing of wind turbines, fucking the monocrystalline fucking solution, which is basically just acid, turbo acid with extra steps for solar panels. And even fucking resin pipeliners for geothermal.
Okay.
It's all fucking toxic.
So, but what do you think about these actual plans to manufacture that stuff here? Because they are announcing multi-billion-dollar packages to get it started.
I hope they pick the river to dump all the fucking waste in carefully.
Okay. But I thought nuclear waste was, the real issue.
Oh, Jesus Christ, nuclear waste, so terrible. Jesus, it's not like we already have a very, very, very fucking safe and real way to get rid of fucking the strontium and or / use it in a breeder reactor to make it even more inert. No, let's just fucking acidify large basins of water because my good feels, my solar panels. Fuck off.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move on to religious freedom now. So we know that it's possible that the current Labor government will do a deal with the Greens to, do two things. One, pass the Religious Discrimination Act, but two, also tighten regulations over the hiring and firing or the discrimination against people from the LGBT LMNOP community. So effectively what the Greens want to do is implement the findings of the law. Was it the Law Commission? I hope I'm getting it right here. Implementing their findings, which essentially said to get rid of all the provisions that exempt, say, religious schools from being able to hire on the basis of sexual preference and religion, etc. And then, which would basically then mean that whatever Religious Freedom Act you may actually create would basically be redundant. There would be no point in it because all these other clauses in other legislation would effectively neutralize it. So that is increasingly looking like the way it's going to go. As can be imagined, religious leaders around Australia are really opposed to this because in the last election, Albanese promised them that not only would he introduce a Religious Discrimination Act, but he would also do so with a bipartisan process. In other words, he would need to get the support of the Liberal and the National Party on board. Now, the coalition does not like a lot of what the Law Reform Commission said. And this has caused Labor to say, well, okay, maybe we won't do this in a bipartisan way, and instead we'll just go to the Greens instead. And yeah, I mean, if they do that, that'll effectively mean that you've got the radical left dictating the course of religious institutions in this country.
Yeah, if you think the current legislation is like religious castration, which, yes, it absolutely fucking is, just wait until you see what they come up with.
Right, and further to that, because the Greens know that it's increasingly likely that they are going to be the kingmakers in all of this. You've got these various LGBT groups who are now lobbying the Greens to take this a step further. So they have been pointing out that when it comes to this kind of discrimination, they're not just talking about schools and churches. They're the two obvious ones, I guess, that you could point out that would discriminate at least among staff. I think that should be their right to do so. But anyway, so these groups are saying that the focus needs to also be on faith-based services, including health providers, charities, and schools. So it's just across the board. It's like wherever you've got religious institutions with some form of influence, they want to encroach on their services and basically tell them who it is that they can hire and fire. So you see how they're never satisfied. They always have to go that one step further. They're like, oh, look, Labor actually wants to talk to us over this. Oh, now this is really our chance to get what we want here. Now, this next story, excuse my phone going off. This next story.
What the fuck was that? You and your fucking ringtones, man. You always have a fucking weird one.
It's always just a loud, heavy ringtone. It's not that weird. So the next story we've got, the last one on religious freedom here. This one is you had a number of anonymous teachers who spoke to the Australian. And this included Catholic Secondary Principals Australia. So it was a number of, obviously, principals from these various Catholic schools. And they have some concerns. Yeah, but they're saying at the moment that the Catholic Church, in running these schools and these churches, are discriminating against women and are forcing some staff to lead covert lives or double lives, in a way. So here's something that they said. No discrimination should occur, as Catholic schools will always be compassionate to staff and students. There should not be any legislative out for religious schools. Does the Church need to change some of its discriminatory policies? Enrollment forms may need to have more than two options for gender identity. Now, just think about this for a minute. This is coming from apparently teachers and principals of Catholic schools. Now, what this suggests to me is not that, this kind of discrimination is running rampant or whatever. What this suggests to me is that the left have already been successful to a large degree in subverting the Catholic Church and its schools. Because why else would you have principals actually saying, we want to forfeit our religious exemption when it comes to discrimination on religious grounds? I can only imagine that these are the kind of people who got jobs at these churches and schools with the specific intention of undermining and subverting them. And now they're doing shit like this. And I really don't think, I mean, look, the Catholic Church does discriminate with women in terms of like, women are allowed to be bishops and stuff like that. They can only be nuns. But that's just the norm, okay? So it doesn't really extend to what they do in churches, I wouldn't say. But yeah, we did say last week that, the reason why green groups and everything push so hard with all this stuff is not because they have a burning desire to practice their Catholic faith and therefore work at one of those institutions. No. They want to go and deliberately undermine these various institutions by infiltrating them. And I think this story shows that is already well and truly underway.
How far the rot has proceeded.
Okay, you're going a bit robot again, Nolsey.
Oh no.
I'll carry on with this story though, while you have a look at that. So we're moving on to freedom of speech and so-called hate speech. Now, we remember these laws in New South Wales under their criminal code. I'm not sure if that's what they call it, but anyway, it's Section 93Z, and this pertains to, what we often call as hate speech. We know that there was a number of complaints made to New South Wales police about Palestinian activists who were apparently yelling out things like "gas the Jews." Apparently, they said later on it was "where's the Jews?" I think. I can't remember what exactly it was. But, also things like even saying, from the river to the sea. Stuff like that.
That's genocide.
Right. So complaints were made to New South Wales police, and they said that the wording of this 93Z section of the criminal code is inoperable. In other words, it's not clear-cut enough if they can go and make an arrest and charge these people. So, since that debacle, Jewish groups have, of course, been urging, and this will happen eventually, we're very close to it, I'd say, amending the criminal code to make 93Z crystal clear that you can't say things like "gas the Jews" or whatever. But it's also been pointed out that in 2023, so just last year, there was actually a conviction under this law, nothing to do with the Israel-Palestine protests, though. This was actually to do with Hindus versus Sikhs. So it's a 24-year-old guy from Western Sydney who was found guilty of incitement under 93Z, but this was on social media. So I don't know what the details were exactly here, but there was basically there was social media stuff going on, like, people replying back and forth about a brawl that erupted in 2020. And this was a Hindu on Sikh brawl. And we've seen a few more of these.
Covering that?
Well, I don't know if maybe we did, but maybe you're confusing it with the Melbourne one that happened not too long ago.
I probably am. Why the fuck are there so many brawls between Hindus and Sikhs?
Right, well, this is my point. I'm pointing this out to just say, no, there's been multiple. There's been many, many of these instances now where you've had violent public clashes between Hindus and Sikhs. So this is not just a Western Sydney thing. It's not just a Melbourne thing. It's across the country now. What do you expect? We're importing them every day. So anyway...
the many skirmishes of the Do Not Redeem crusade.
Yeah. So look, because of this, this involved a real brawl and everything. I don't know what this guy actually specifically said, but he was found guilty of inciting violence on the basis of race and religion. Okay, because, these people, the Sikhs, they want their own, ethno-religious state carved out of India. Khalistan, I think they call it. I even saw some guy wearing the Sikh turban or whatever it is they call it, and he had the Khalistan flag on his bonnet the other day. You know,
Oh
so
God.
much for Australian multiculturalism. Putting all of those ethnic conflicts aside, no, they just get brought to our shores. That's all. So anyway, this guy Avon Kanwal, so he's from the Hindu community. He was convicted, but he's now taking it to court to overturn it. So a lot of people are saying that if this is overturned, that means the Labor government is going to quickly rush to amend 93Z to make it absolutely crystal clear that stuff like that is incitement and is a crime. On the other hand, if it's upheld, that will result in further complaints to the New South Wales police to actually go and press charges against Palestinian protesters who were saying things like "from the river to the sea," even though that's quite different to inciting violence in a religious brawl. Nonetheless, that's what
It's
they want
more
to do.
indirect.
Yeah, it is. So anyway, don't think though that the Jewish lobby is just sitting on their hands over all of this. They are now taking legal action. That is, the ECAJ is taking legal action against two Islamic hate preachers, as they were called. And I'm reading this directly from Australian Jewish News. It says, the ECAJ is stepping up where the police and government have failed. And, I love this quote at the beginning. So this is from the ECAJ's Peter Wertheim. He says, one of the rules of Australian multicultural society is that we do not bring the hatreds, prejudices, and bigotry of overseas conflicts and societies into Australia. Really?
Are you sure about that?
If that's a rule, I don't know if we're enforcing it that well. And also, might I add, I don't know if the ECAJ is following it very well. You know, I mean, it takes two to tango in all of this. So anyway, this is two Western Sydney hate preachers, as they're called, who gave speeches in Western Sydney, where else, last year. And this is civil action, of course, that's being taken. So, you know, when you talk about like threats to menace and to harm and stuff like that, they might even be going for why can't I remember the, oh man, how could I forget the section 18C from the Racial Discrimination Act? They may also be fighting under that as well, because 18C is not used very often, believe it or not. It's a completely bullshit law, but it's relatively it's used minimally. You know, Andrew Bolt is one of the.
Well, it's because like when it was first introduced in the 90s, they used it like a fuck ton. And what happens when you use a law a fuck ton and generate, you know, a large portfolio of precedent for it is you basically just make it harder to use.
Yeah.
So they've gone and done that. So they're going to have to find some very specific use cases for it, which they might struggle to do.
Yeah, well, right. So, I mean, well, what you're saying is like the more precedent is handed down, the more specific it gets, rather than general.
Well, again, that's also why, like in theory, all these new hate speech laws and hate symbol laws and, you know, trading of Nazi paraphernalia, you could like back in the day, you could probably have made a case under 18EC for it back in the day, but now it's been you know, it's the hammer that's been used too many times. It's fucking dull.
Yeah,
and because they've used it in these use cases, literally that's why their tool has become useless, so they're getting a new tool.
Yep. So anyway, whatever happens here, I think we can basically be guaranteed that New South Wales's criminal code will be amended probably this year, because there's just too much pressure on them. And it's not just from the Jewish lobby, it's from the Liberal Party as well. Because remember, the Liberal Party are the ones who love fighting against anti-Semitism the most. There's no doubt about that. And when you know, speaking about those laws you just mentioned, about symbols and stuff, well, they weren't actually going to include the Roman salute under those Commonwealth laws. then they were
Yeah.
under sustained pressure from Michaelia Cash and other liberals to do so. And then Mark Dreyfus capitulated, like 2 days later or something.
Yeah, they got fucking mogged on by some dudes in black sports attire, and they cried so hard they had to fucking put it into law.
Yeah. And you've got the exact same thing going on in state parliament in New South Wales right now. The coalition is just hammering Labor all the time. When are you going to upgrade the criminal code so we can start prosecuting these people the Jews don't like? All right. So, look, quick story on national security, and I guess just sort of a Schadenfreude moment in a way. The former secretary of the Home Affairs Department, Mike Pizzullo, he may actually going to be stripped of his Order of Australia award and medal.
Oh no! Did he do a naughty?
I can't remember what. Well, look, what this was. We might remember that he was. He basically had to resign at the end of last year because there was leaked text messages that went out where he was saying that the next Home Affairs Minister needed to be a right-winger from the Conservative faction of the Liberal Party. And so now there are apparently talks that the Governor-General, who is granted the powers to revoke an honour like that, they can do so if the person has behaved or acted in a manner that has brought disrepute to the order. So anyway, Sky News really don't like this because Pizzullo is seen to be a man of the conservative right. And, like I said, advocating for that appointment for the Minister of Home Affairs. So, yeah, I wouldn't actually doubt that he's of the conservative right. But the reason why I laugh at this is because he's been an enemy of white nationalists right from the beginning.
Yeah.
Because when he talks about increased surveillance that is necessary against terror threats in Australia, it's not just Mike Burgess from ASIO talking about that stuff. It was Mike Pizzullo, pretty much on an equal footing, was doing that and talking about how we are the real increasing threat in Australia rather than Islamic terrorism, whatever it might be. It's those pesky white guys instead. So
it's those pesky white guys have got better takes than me.
Right. And for that, and for the absolute harassment and persecution of our guys, that is what he should have the medal taken away for, I mean, wow, he sent some bloody text saying, I would prefer if you put this person into office. I don't give a shit, really. I just don't. But I'm glad to see this guy fall on his sword. All right.
Yeah, good.
So, going to A News. We have just had our first election to the First Nations voice to Parliament in South Australia. Remember, South Australia actually just formed one. So you want to know what the voter turnout was? Because remember, this is not a normal election. This is one where you have to actually be not just obviously registered as a voter, but as an Aboriginal voter. All right, it's got to say on paper that you are Aboriginal. Now, apparently, there is an estimated 27,534 registered Aboriginal voters in South Australia. So only 2,748, that is about 10%, voted in that election. And I loved Peter Malinowskis' cope on all of this because he was asked, are you worried about the fact that the voter turnout was so low? And his excuse was, well, no, this was a successful first election. And you have to remember that it's only just getting started. We expect that it will build and we'll get more voters for every election that we continue to have into the future. I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? It's the complete opposite, actually. You're talking about the time of peak publicity for The Voice, not just because of it being new in South Australia, but because it was the main topic of conversation for the past year and a half at the federal level because we had the referendum as well. So if ever there was going to be a time where people were most engaged and excited about going to vote, it would surely be the first one, So this logic he's using of like, oh no, it's just going to improve down the track. I don't buy that for a second.
Dude, best case scenario, and this is like best case for the voice continuing to be a thing in South Australia, is that people get jaded and forget about it. Now, probably what is going to happen is people are going to get pissed off and try and remove it.
Yeah, all that. I mean, right now, I'll just make my prediction that while this year's, I don't know how often they're doing these, but the next election that they do have, I'm going to say it's going to fall below 10%. And by the way, another reason why it's so low, all of these people, at least on paper, are Aboriginal. All right. Remember what happened actually during the referendum? They had to send out those buses to remote communities to get them to vote. And well, actually, prior to that, they sent them out to get them enrolled to vote, because many of them are just not enrolled at all. It's just not something that they do. A lot of them would barely know what voting is. And yeah, I mean, mind you, the ones in South Australia would be mainly, half caste, quarter caste, whatever.
Yeah, political Aboriginals.
Political Aboriginals, but even still, only 10% is all they got. Pitiful figure. Okay.
It's almost like no one gives a shit.
No. And no one will give a shit at the next one. Okay. Moving to Victoria. Do we remember good old Henry Reynolds? He's basically hailed as like the number one historian of Aboriginal Australia. And he's the foremost pusher of the frontier wars theory, the idea that around 30,000 or so Aborigines died on the mainland of Australia in resistance fighting against British colonialism.
Oh, no, not stochastic theft.
Yeah, well,
resistance fighting.
Yeah, look, if you want to see this stuff debunked, just go to quadrant.org. Only read their Aboriginal stuff. Everything else they do is shit, pretty much. But their stuff on Aboriginal history is great. Anyway, something like somewhat surprising here, or maybe not, but Victoria, as we know, have this truth-telling commission. This is where, basically you go there to talk about how evil white people are and how great Aboriginal people are.
A Globe Libel seminar.
Of course. Yes, and Henry Reynolds loves taking part in this. And he was actually saying here that when it came to many of the deaths that happened in Victoria, they happened at the hands of illegal squatters rather than of colonial authorities. So you see, I guess the prevailing idea is that it was like members of the British Crown who were fighting the Aborigines and killing them in battle. Now, Reynolds definitely does push that narrative. As I said, he's the one who pushes the whole frontier wars thing. But now he's playing this new angle where he's saying, well, also, when they started to let the convicts free, they would always tell them, no, you can't live here, you can't live there. They'd usually have like a radius around, the main colony, the capital city or whatever, and they'd say, you have to, you can go and make a farm elsewhere. Basically they just wanted to push the criminal vagrants away from the colonial center as much as they could. So what happened was, a lot of the time, was they just went and illegally squatted on a lot of the land that they weren't supposed to be on, that they were told, you got to piss off. So now Henry Reynolds is sort of revising the history books and saying, yeah, look, not only did we kill a lot of Aborigines, but like these white trash bogans did as well. Like they're just as responsible as the British Crown.
I'm sorry, but if you look at the uniforms they made the convicts wear until basically they'd served their sentence in Australia. I'm not even joking. They made them wear jesters outfits. I'm pretty sure if you spend a good half of a decade wearing that shit in the fucking heat over here, you deserve a little bit of genocide as a treat. Not that I even believe the fucking narrative to begin with.
We know what I find really amusing about all of this is, despite the fact that, yes, to a very large degree, Australia was founded as a penal settlement, still, we managed to actually build a successful first world Western country here, despite that. despite the fact that we actually descended from convicts.
Oh no, it was I remember this Twitter
convicts
post.
were white.
Yeah, that's pretty much the deciding factor there. There was some black activist on fucking Twitter, and you're saying like if someone was talking about Haiti and all these like fucking like small African like key island colonies and etc. And someone said like, oh look at these fucking shitholes. And then the black activist said, how about you go get some fucking some white criminals and put them on an island and see what they can do, huh? And then everyone just starts posting pictures of like the Sydney Harbour Bridge and Australian cities circa 1970.
Yeah, exactly. Despite the fact that we came from like a criminal caste of people, the very fact that it was still a white colony ensured that we would develop into a very prosperous Western country. That's what we got. Okay. All right, so we got some figures on the Yes campaign in terms of who spent what. Sorry, the Yes and the No campaigns. So roughly, we're looking at around $60 million for the Yes side. The No side was around 25 million. So it was less than half of what the Yes campaign spent. So
and the underdog still won.
Yeah, I mean, it really does show that, when people are not convinced of something, well, I mean, look, it's also to do with, Albo is right to an extent in that, the government did not have bipartisan support for the referendum. So, it may well have been that at that point it was futile and it didn't matter how much money you threw at it, the referendum was doomed to fail. But nonetheless, they did throw a lot at it. So the main contributor to the Yes campaign was Yes 23, obviously $43.8 million. That's no surprise. But then this one here, the University of New South Wales, they house the Uluru Statement from their Heart group. They've spent $10.3 million. Now, where the hell does a university get a spare $10.3 million from? Why are they that flush with cash that they're able to donate that much? That ultimately went to nothing.
The same year complaining about them losing money hand over fist because they didn't have infinity Indians.
Might be it. So the largest no spender was Australians for Unity, who are also called Fair Australia. So they donated $11.1 million. And then the rest of the money that came was from Advance Australia. And then we don't really know about the rest because they tended to be smaller donations and you don't have to declare your identity with donations that small. Now, what was very interesting, though, is also like who didn't spend money on this. And believe it or not, the Greens basically spent nothing on it. So the Greens were contacted by the ABC as to why, now that we've got these figures, like the financial details are available, why did the Greens not come up on any of this? So a party spokesman for the Greens said that they did use their existing printing budgets and provided vocal support for the campaign. Okay, that's pretty much confirming what they said.
Fucking hippies.
Right. No, but this is interesting because it's absolutely true that many people on the left, if not most of them, love to talk about how we need to give our money to the poor or to help the disadvantaged, or whatever it might be. But they never give their own money. It's never their own. It's always someone else's. And by the way, there's even been studies that show that despite that, you'd think, okay, well, the counter argument might be, well, they just think everyone should pay the equal amount in tax. Did you know that people on the left are more likely to cheat on their taxes too? And so when I read this, I was not surprised. I'm sure a lot of people would be. They're thinking, well, the Greens, they're supposed to be one of the biggest advocates of the voice out there. Surely they would spend some of their own money on this. No, they did not. They provided vocal support. You know what I call that? Virtue signaling. All right?
Yeah.
Trying to make yourself look virtuous by simply spouting a bunch of rhetoric, but then never putting anything behind it, never actually doing anything to put your ideas into action.
Well, from memory, I will give something to their credit. They didn't really like the voice because it didn't include the shame white men forever clause.
Well, I mean, they lost a senator out of it. They lost an
Yeah.
immunity of thought because she basically said it doesn't go far enough.
Can you really call that a loss?
Well, I don't know who's lost and who's gained. It's hard to figure that one out. But the rest of the party though were maybe they did want to go that step further because they want a treaty done at the same time. But they were definitely in favour of it. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to crime. Now, not a surprise that Northern Territory police are definitely not ruling out further emergency measures in Alice Springs. As you know, that there are curfews. For now, I think it simply applies to youths. They have to be home by a certain hour. Apparently, a lot of them are still just blatantly ignoring that because they simply abide by their own rules. But yeah, Northern Territory police are saying that it could go even a step further because they're still struggling, despite the curfew, to get a handle on crime.
Well, yeah, again, there's the law and then there's the willingness to enforce it. And, not saying too much, but after the fucking, was it the Zachary Rolfe case? Yeah,
well, that's the next story, actually. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, there's no impotence. There's no fucking, zeal or etc. in the Northern Territory police. They're having to bring in fucking New South Wales Metro cops for that shit.
Right.
And even then, they know that any given second, they fucking look at an Aboriginal boy who's currently in the process of destroying a tavern the wrong way, and it's all over for them.
Yeah. So on Zachary Rolfe, the chief of the Northern Territory's corruption watchdog just put out a statement declaring mock awards issued within the Territory Police's elite police unit are, quote, racist towards First Nations people. So what's he talking about here? Well, according to Zachary Rolfe, when he gave evidence at an inquest regarding police culture and the death of
Mr. Hatchetman.
Kulanjai Walker is his name, yes. Guy with the axe. He said, apparently, that Northern Territory Police had a Coon of the Year award, and that was for members who exhibited the most coon-like behaviour. And then the award's background had the Aboriginal flag.
Oh, that's fucking hilarious.
Now, look, I could well believe Zachary Rolfe over that. It wouldn't surprise me. And is it racist or whatever? Well, okay, give me a definition of racist and whatnot. Let's say yes, it is. Can you blame the cops for doing this? And by that, I mean they work with Aborigines every day. They see their level of criminality and they have to deal with it. They have to suffer for it. They're a true example of people doing the jobs that no one else wants to do, which is why they are still struggling to hire people. What a surprise.
You're talking about people who are quite literally babysitting a fucking group of people with an IQ that puts them a standard deviation below clinically retarded.
Yeah.
They are professional fucking violent tendency people, babysitters.
And by the way, it's very common at work to, just take the piss out of the nature of what your work entails. It's how you blow off a little bit of steam. It's how you keep a good sense of humor about your job. Those little things that you do when you're on off time like this, I don't have a bloody problem with it. It's I remember people were outraged when some footage emerged of, I think it was Australian soldiers downing yards of beer in Afghanistan. And
Yes.
I'm like, really? They go out for like 2 weeks at a time, and sometimes they do like brutal routines, like sleep for 4 hours every 12 hours, for example. They do shit like that. At the end of those 2 weeks, if they want to scull a couple of fucking beers, then fine. Good on them. Like, who the fuck am I to judge them in that situation? So if these guys want to have their own Coon of the Year award, let them do it. How else are they going to blow off steam? You know, they live with that shit. They work with these scumbags every fucking day. They want to make a little bit of light about it and have a sense of humor. That's what
not
makes
even
the job
joking.
somewhat
We're literally
manageable.
we're having this discussion because they're having a freak out about like suggesting the rule of law actually be enforced. Like, just keep that in your head when you're thinking about what we're talking about here. This is a shit situation.
Okay, so Queensland. It has been reported that they are facing extreme overcrowding in watch houses and prisons. And basically, the warning right now is that if it keeps going on the same way, you're going to end up with a death in custody pretty soon. Now, dare I say that they have actually been arresting more people in Queensland? We've gone on about how Labor governments every now and then get forced into being tough on crime, or at least somewhat tough on crime, basically because of a huge spate of violent offences that have occurred. Obviously, the stabbing of that 90-year-old grandmother not too long ago was one of those things. Now, at the same time, though, they don't have enough staff, and we were just talking about that. Why you're talking about an absolute prick of a job that no one wants to do, and on top of that, you're talking about a media that demonizes you every chance they get. So no one wants to do these jobs. What a surprise that they're understaffed, and they can't actually contain these adult watch houses properly anymore. So yeah, if there is a death in custody, if there's a riot or something like that, a riot much worse than what we saw in Banksia Hill recently, no surprise whatsoever. Okay.
And by the way, when they say death in custody, they're not taking the lefty thing, which is like, oh my god, a guard's just going to go in there and beat someone to death. No, they're talking about an inmate being killed by another federal that's inside there.
Most of the time, yeah, that's what it is. Okay, so, well, on to the related topic of prostitution. So they're actually moving to reform and basically just entirely decriminalise sex work in Queensland. So these reforms would ban councils from making any local laws to manage the industry, acts the authority that regulates the state's 20 licensed brothels, and treat sex work like any other business. So in other words, they're getting, rid of the regulatory framework that, exists because prostitution is, yes, a different kind of business that would obviously require a little bit more regulation, you would think. So a former family court judge has given evidence to a parliamentary inquiry onto all of this, saying, no, this is a really bad idea because what you're actually going to get happen then is outlaw motorcycle gangs are going to start buying them up. And we know this because that's what they've done in other states. Like, you always, think of like the sleazy business that you might know, like a strip club or a brothel or something like that. You can basically be guaranteed that some underworld figure, some outlaw figure is involved in it in some way. Here in Perth, I can think of a few examples, like the Voodoo Lounge, which is a strip club. That was owned by... Yeah. But what was the guy specifically? His name was Eddie Whitnall, I think. Anyway,
Sounds
he was a
right.
gang rapist. Eddie Whitnall, I believed, who was a gang rapist. He owned the Voodoo Lounge. Also, about 1/4 of Northbridge, including Metro City, is owned by John Kizon. Okay.
Yes.
Anyone who knows anything about him, he's a convicted heroin trafficker and widely believed to have continued trafficking drugs, but just, he was getting away with it for a very long time.
Well, there was that one Lebanese nightclub owner. I can't remember fucking what his name was, but he got stabbed to death outside of his nightclub in Northbridge because of a drug deal gone wrong.
Yeah, the Rise nightclub. I remember the manager got done for 300 ecstasy pills a few years back.
Yeah.
So yeah, this shit, you think of a dodgy business, you can think of dodgy people who are involved in it. So at the moment, they seem to be keeping the bikies out of it, but that's going to change, and it looks like they're going to push ahead with it as well. So, yeah.
Hey boy.
Moving on to industrial relations. So last week we covered how the ACTU, the peak union body, want to have the minimum wage increase above 5%. In other words, above the current rate of inflation. Certainly not above the previous rates of inflation that were around 7 to 8%. Well, guess what the national employers have called for? They want a pay rise of 2.8% for all workers. For all minimum wage earners, which is, yes, below the current inflation rate, which I think is 4.1% right now. So that is actually them openly supporting a cut in relative wages. Okay? Absolute wages, of course, would be going up if you want to be picky about it. But that means that the bang for their buck is reduced. They end up worse in the cost of living war. Okay, let's move on to other economy and cost of living news.
Don't make me cry.
Just quickly, yes, skimming over my notes here. So there seems to be an increasing rift forming between the coalition, with the issue of divestiture. So this is about the government using powers to break up companies, and specifically here we're talking about Coles and Woolworths, the duopoly that exists in groceries. So we've covered before that David Littleproud has openly actually called for divestiture powers to be used, and he may have, unlikely allies in the Greens who are calling for that as well. But it looks like, well, at least the reports to the Australian are saying that the Nationals are privately lobbying the Liberal Party to make it a coalition policy before the next election to implement something, at least, to help implement a stick approach rather than a carrot approach to breaking up the groceries duopoly. So, no one's saying that this would result in a split of the coalition, but, it certainly would cause a little bit of friction at the least. So, yeah, it'll be interesting if, perhaps the Liberal Party foregoes a little bit of their free market ideology in favour of regulation that, would actually hurt Coles and Woolies, free up
Get out the mallet, let's start flattening some balls.
But we'll see what happens. Remember, Labor does not support this. And Albo basically said, what, do you think we're a bunch of communists? We don't run a command economy here. This is a free market. He basically said that. Okay. All right, and I already talked about, the upcoming budget. So it's on the 14th of May. Albo is promising, as I said, to make this all about cost of living. But he's also promising 2.5 million small business owners that they will benefit from measures that will drive down their cost of living and even their electricity bill. Oh my God.
Type of fucking God. I got like a fucking $120 electricity bill for a house that's empty recently.
Yeah, well, look, he says this. He said, this is at a speech that he recently gave. He said the energy bill relief package he negotiated with states and territories has already delivered up to $650 in savings for around 1 million small businesses, along with 5 million families. So what he wants to do in the next budget is basically take that energy bill relief package and expand it. He's going to add more to it. So, it'll be more freebies, but it won't actually result in, the number on your power bill decreasing. That's not going to happen. You'll basically just get given cash. And that's what the government has to do. There's a lot of situations where if they can't actually provide real cost of living relief, the government literally just gives you money. You just mentioned one, the energy bill relief. And we got quite a few McGowan bucks. I saved a bit on my electricity bill because of energy credits that McGowan gave everyone for their synergy bill. And that, at the end of the day, is all you can do.
Yeah.
Okay. So just quickly on infrastructure, the $31 billion inland rail project, this is connecting New South Wales all the way up to Queensland, something that was actually sold to the Australian public nearly 10 years ago now as a transformational infrastructure project that would connect Melbourne and Brisbane. And this was originally sold to us by the coalition government. And the last responsible minister was Barnaby Joyce. So Albo is saying that as it stands at the moment, as usual with any one of these infrastructure projects, no matter who's managing it, coalition or Labor, enormous delays, enormous cost blowouts. And despite the fact this has been on the cards for 10 years now, apparently only 17% of it has been completed. Yeah, as you might have guessed, it was due to be finished by now. And but Albo is blaming it all on Barnaby Joyce, basically, for all the delays. Well, I'm sure it was a little bit of his fault, but it's, definitely Labor's fault as well. Share the blame there. Okay, quickly on polls. Two-party preferred. We have the coalition on 48 and Labor on 42. So that's remained pretty much unchanged. If we look at Labor's vote in WA, they're actually down to 34% on the primary level now. So it's gone down a fair bit. The coalition is on 39. So you find them ahead on the primary vote here and there. For example, they're still ahead in Queensland.
Somehow.
Look at that. They're even ahead in Victoria on the primary vote. Can you believe that?
Fucking serious?
At the end of the day, yeah, in Victoria, only by a point. But the primary vote, remember, it's not two-party preferred. There's the primary vote. The coalition is ahead by 1 point. I mean, look, ultimately what matters, of course, is two-party preferred. And Labor do have that 4-point lead. But also remember, the year where Bill Shorten lost, 2019, all the news polls had Labor at 52 and Coalition at 48. And they actually managed to lose the election. So, despite the fact news polls are owned by the Murdoch press, it actually tends to be biased towards Labor. There's a margin of error in Labor's favour in these polls. Okay.
Is that because of how they do the polling, or is that some kind of editorial decision?
I don't know. I mean, one theory could be that, it's designed to sort of scare people on the right into thinking that Labor's going to take power and you better get out there and vote and not throw your vote away to a third-party candidate, something like that. To a minor
definitely
party.
See that.
I don't know, but it is strange. I mean, usually it would be the opposite. They want to create the idea that Labor is on the downfall, but yeah, doesn't really tend to be showing through. Not the two-party preferred figures, anyway. Okay, well, look, we really didn't have much state news this week. So just in Tasmania, They still haven't formed a government yet. So it looks like they're going to have to negotiate with Jackie Lambie. The Jackie Lambie Network is what the party is called. They're still maybe getting 3 seats. Counting has not concluded yet, and still getting through the the postal votes and all that kind of thing. And it's definitely going to be a Liberal government, though. There's no doubt about that. I think they're sitting on about 13 or 14 seats right now, which is 3 or 4 more than what Labor have got. So, you need that invitation from the governor to form government, and they're not going to give it to Labor with that few seats. Okay, now on the Jackie Lambie network, Tammy Tyrrell, who is a federal senator representing Tasmania, has actually left the party. She said that Jackie Lambie has lost confidence in her, and therefore she cannot in good conscience continue as a member, so she is going to sit on the crossbench. Now, I have to admit I didn't know much about Tammy Tyrrell. I still don't. But Lambie is just kind of brushing this off and saying that she wishes her the best of luck, and she's trying to make this look like as much of an amicable decision as possible. But we know these things never are. There's usually something a bit dirty going on.
Maybe we can actually figure out what the fuck Jackie Lambie's about.
Yeah, because I still haven't been able to figure that out. Former Palmer United member, which if any of the Palmer United members actually followed, what was in print, what were the actual policies of the Palmer Party, you could basically say that they were like soft liberals. They were like a bunch of Malcolm Turnbulls in a party who maybe were even kinder to, say, refugee issues. So in that respect, they're very much, I guess, people of the centre, and they're kind of like the Teals in a way. A lot of their stuff actually resembles the Teals. But yeah, but Jackie Lambie ended up kind of being on the left on like industrial relations issues, for example. She wanted more generous pensions. She wanted, and this I support her on, she wanted more support for veterans, because she's a veteran herself, actually. She talked about the fact that we don't have enough psychological resources afforded to veterans who have, symptoms like PTSD. We want them to fight the wars for Zog, and then we don't want to look after them when they come home. That stuff I completely agree with her on. But yeah, as to, a solid political ideology, I still don't know if she's really formed one. Okay, so the Dunstan by-election. So this was a state election in South Australia. This was triggered by the retirement of Stephen Marshall, who was actually the former Premier, Liberal Premier of South Australia. Well, believe it or not, Labor have won this seat. So it being the seat of a former Premier meant that this was definitely considered to be a blue ribbon, safe Liberal seat. Now, that's said to have changed because of, changes to electoral boundaries and all that kind of stuff. But still, wow, like the Liberal Party continues to be in a world of hurt if they're even losing the seats of former premiers. Wow. Now,
do you think they're going to recover from this one?
I would say at the very least they've got to wait for not the next election, but the one after. That kind of like here in WA. Even though they're not quite as screwed in South Australia as they are in WA, but also just like historically, the Liberal Party is unpopular in South Australia, even more so than Victoria, believe it or not. But let me just quickly look at the numbers. Yeah, so on the two-party preferred basis, Labor won it. They were on 50.8%, Liberals on 49.2%. So it was very close. That's razor thin right there. And, oh yeah, look at that. So it was actually only a 1.4% swing to Labor. So yeah, I guess Labor were already kind of making grounds in that seat prior as well. Okay, so George Christensen is back. Remember that lard-ass backbencher from the National Party who was often called the Maverick? because he was against COVID vaccines and that kind of thing. Remember also the guy who spent all of his travel expenses on holidays to the Philippines, ended up marrying a Filipino woman, and also getting a stomach staple because he couldn't handle his hunger cravings. Yeah, I'm trying to kind of burst his bubble a little bit here. Like George Christensen is not based. But anyway, the self-styled woke buster is actually back in politics to a small degree. He's a councillor in Queensland now, having won a position at the local election there recently. So look, if there's something good about this, though, he did say that he's going to be using his position to fight the culture wars in Queensland, and that's going to include investigating council libraries that have been distributing sexualized material to children. So he said, I've had people come to me showing me books the local library is populated with for kids that are completely and utterly inappropriate. So there are a lot of problems there in that culture war space, I guess. Well, okay. I mean, if you're going to use your council position for something good, then yeah, go after the local libraries for stuff like that. Maybe you'll actually do something worthwhile there. Okay.
I'm not holding my breath.
Oh yeah, I don't watch with that much interest, I can't say. So Nick Xenophon, remember him? He was the guy who founded the No Pokies party, which was also a South Australian party. He then migrated to federal politics as an independent, although he basically brought the No Pokies platform with him. And he was always known for doing these elaborate, like, public stunts and stuff, dressing up like a fucking idiot and making a dick of himself in front of the camera. Well, he's got brain cancer. So it's a brain tumor type.
Explains everything.
Well, I don't know. We don't know how long it's been going on for. But, yeah, he was diagnosed with it, and he's going to be undergoing a major surgery to have it removed. And, yeah, it was actually a guy from my high school who had this, and he's dead now. He had the tumor removed, and then he underwent chemo and, you know, all the other treatment that you get, but it still came back.
Yeah, like, brain tumors are a fucking problem. Also, there's like with cancers and like surgically removing cancers. Normally, they're allowed to be like a little bit more generous with, you know, the amount of material that they can remove in other parts of the body. But with the brain tumor ones, they're on the conservative side of removing them, so they do come back a lot. It's kind of sad, you know, it's a sad story all around, especially because 90% of gamblers quit just before they're about to win $1 gazillion billion.
I don't know if you're making a pokies joke there or something, but look, I never particularly liked Nick Xenophon anyway. I guess I did kind of like his anti-pokey stuff a little bit, but everything else, he was certainly a friend of the refugees, and he had no problems with mass immigration or anything. So I'm not saying I'm glad he's got a brain tumor or something, though. I won't take it that far.
No.
Okay.
No, but that is unironically sad.
Yeah. All right. So onto the federal parliament. So here's something that has leaked to the media, much to the chagrin of Katie Gallagher. So this is a draft government proposal that would see politicians docked up to 5% of their pay if they were to commit serious breaches of workplace rules. So, I don't know, acting inappropriately, getting drunk during session time, stuff like that, which, you know, is actually known to happen from time to time. And so, yeah, this was a draft proposal. It was leaked. And it says that the government is actually working with everyone, the coalition and the crossbenchers, on a proposal. I guess because there is this idea of the Canberra bubble and politicians behaving badly, you know, and you can thank bloody Bridgie Higgins and people like that for that idea. You know, I've said before, I think the idea of a Canberra bubble is bullshit. The idea that politicians like actively get away with sex scandals and stuff, I find that ludicrous, considering cameras are on them all the time. And that is the absolute scoop of your journalistic career if you manage to be the one to get that story first. So the camera bubble in terms of our democracy being an illusion, yeah, that's a real bubble. That's a real bubble, and how much corruption is covered up and everything, because the media are complicit in that. But things like sex scandals, no. Jesus, the media love that kind of stuff. You can't keep that under wraps. Okay. So, talking about media matters. So, Meta have actually, we remember how social media groups were forced to pay for the use of news headlines. So, for example, when you type in a topic and then click on news in Google, Google have to actually pay the providers of those stories. I can't remember what the fee is. They argued against it because they said, look, this is like kind of showing people a menu without actually charging them anything. But the thing is, Google does benefit very much due to increased traffic flow, thanks to news articles like that. That's the argument anyway. But anyway, the same thing happened with Facebook. They had to make those small payments as well to those media companies. Well, they've stopped doing that. They've actually just reversed that. They just have the complete policy of not doing it. And they had previously done this in Canada. And also in Canada, they actually just stopped printing or publishing the news completely. So Canadian Facebook, you will not find Canadian news at all. Now, as can be imagined, like News Corp, the Murdoch press, did not like this at all, and they wrote several hit pieces attacking Meta and Facebook over this decision. And they're also toying with the idea of court action because they're saying, no, hold on, the government told you have to pay these fees and you're not doing so. So if that court action becomes a reality, well, that will just mean that they'll stop listing news stories altogether. And a lot of people are saying that this is like bad for media diversity. Man, I don't give a shit about Facebook not printing news or publishing news. And I mean, if you're
honestly, those boomers should stay away from the fucking news.
Yeah, well, if you're going to Facebook as your source of news, what the hell are you doing? I mean, going to Google, at least you can get some relevant stories and whatever. But use Google, use other search engines, use actual news websites as well. Listen to the Racer. You'll find some good news on there. Don't go to bloody Facebook. So the idea that would be some great loss to media diversity, hell no.
But Finian, how am I supposed to know about thug hunting in my area?
Right. Okay, so turning to Twitter, of course now called X, Elon Musk is actually threatening the Australian government because X is facing a fine of up to $800,000 over a tweet that has actually been removed that apparently was disparaging to a transgender activist called Teddy Cook. I'd never heard of this person before. But someone who calls himself Billboard Chris said he has decided to take a stand against gender ideology and described it as a pseudo-religious movement. He tweeted something, I'm sorry I don't have the tweet in front of me, but it was something to do with this Teddy Cook character. The E-Safety Commission ordered this to be taken down. However, by that point, it was already like retweeted and further disseminated on Twitter, so it got a lot of reach. In other words, and it now could actually be resulting in an $800,000 fine. So, on the grounds of free speech, X is saying that they're going to take this to court, or at least they're threatening to. So it'll be very interesting to see the powers of the E-Safety Commission be truly tested in court to see if they do have the right to actually say, you must take this tweet down and you're going to cop this fine for doing so. Even if it is Elon Musk fighting for it, like, it's something. We may get something out.
We shall see.
Now, here's something interesting. We've all heard about plans to make like a national ID, and Bob Hawke wanted to make like a national ID card, like an identity card, government card back in the 80s. Now, the government is again sort of proposing this idea, creating a digital ID. But what they say anyway, the purpose is when it comes to, say, filling out online forms and, having to get ID checks and, all the kind of rigmarole that you have to go through sometimes, which it can be a bit of a pain to, sign up to a new credit card or get a bank loan or whatever it might be. So the government is proposing that you could actually just have a one-stop for this digital ID that would kind of have all of that stuff on record. And therefore, you could just log in using that ID, put in your password, and then boom, you automatically get approved or whatever because all your information is on there. So in other words, it's there to save time. Now, I'm actually going to say here, that may not be such a bad idea. Now, the reason I say this, a lot of people probably just went, what the fuck? The reason I say that is because whenever you fill out any of these forms, or sign up to get a new credit card or whatever, you're signing your data over anyway, all right? All of these personal details and everything, you're handing them over to Google and on your Flybuys card to Coles and whatever else. You're doing that actually every day. What the government would have here would probably be less. They would have less on their database about you than Google would. So, if it's something there for convenience, it may not actually be a bad idea. Now, of course, you still have to be skeptical. Are they simply just, wanting to just collect as much information on people as they possibly can? And then, would they then go and share that information with other government agencies and maybe even the private sector?
Is there going to be a scandal where it's like, oh my God, all this government collected ID information got sold by the government to a handful of private companies for a few $100 million? I can see that happening. Yeah.
So in that respect, then obviously I would oppose it. But yeah, I've always got to add in that, when the government says they want to get info on you, just remember the private companies already do. And you are voluntarily handing it over to them every day.
There's quite literally a website where you basically just give it like your fucking first and last name and date of birth, and it just goes through all these like databases where like credit card companies, private companies, social media sell your information too, and it just brings it all up. You'd be surprised how much of a digital footprint you actually fucking have, even if you're the kind of guy who's careful not to have one.
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. Okay, so moving on to disability. So, recently there was this kind of deal made between the states, territories, and federal government to kind of spread around the burden of the cost of disability. Now, the main reason for that, of course, is because the NDIS budget continues to just blow out of control. It's already bigger than Medicare's budget, even though it's a relatively new scheme. Medicare came into existence in the 80s, I believe, but it's already bigger than Medicare. But Chris Minns, already Premier of New South Wales, is expressing buyer's remorse, you could say, over this deal that was done. That was effectively to get the states or the territories in on a 50-50 split. The state or the territory pays 50%. The federal government pays 50%. The 50% the government spends is on the NDIS, and then the 50% that the state or territory spends is on basically all the other services that are afforded to disabled people. Now, even though they haven't even really fleshed much of it out yet, Chris Minns said, the federal government is not able to say how much New South Wales taxpayers will be on the hook for. So they're already expressing skepticism, I guess, as to just how much money is going to be involved and if they're actually going to be on the hook for more than 50%. Because I expect that, Bill Shorten, who's the minister for the NDIS, is going to want to kind of palm off as much of the expenses as he can to the states, because the NDIS is becoming a sore spot for Labor in terms of putting a hole in the budget. The NDIS is out of control.
NDIS, let's let the autists cripple our budget.
Yeah. So look, that's actually the next story I had on this. So another scheme from the Albo government is incentivizing employers to recruit autistic workers, pushing companies to include people with autism on boards and in senior management, and public spaces made sensory friendly. So that includes, I know that supermarkets have had these things where for 1 hour only autistic people can shop, if you've seen these before. Hasn't been many of them. And what they do is they turn down the lights a little bit and they turn off the radio. So there's no big loud noises or bright lights.
Because minimize the sensory input, just so they don't have a fucking fit in the middle of the store.
Because many autistic people are kind of overly sensitive to that.
Just sneak in there with the strobe light and set them all off.
This is also something that's going to be set out in the May budget coming up. So, yeah. Interesting to see what will happen there. Okay, so Western Australia's new abortion laws have just come into effect. So the way the ABC put it was on their headline was, "Abortion just got easier to access in WA thanks to new laws. Here's what has changed." Talking about a positive spin, not at all. So what has changed is that women don't need a doctor's referral to get an abortion. They aren't required to undergo counselling. Almost every aspect of abortion has been decriminalised apart from the provision of backyard abortions by unqualified people. So yes, even in terms of late-term abortions, you can still get an abortion up to that of 23 weeks. So there you go. And then, it doesn't stop there though. After 23 weeks, you need to get the approval of 2 doctors. So you can pretty much get it at any point so long as you get the approval of 2 doctors. Considering that, this is even more extreme than Victoria's laws that allow you to abort them up to 5 months, the fetus up to 5 months old. So, yeah, we basically, in WA, take the crown now for baby murder.
Yay!
All right, and finally, did you know that we've got a new Governor-General? That's ceremonial post that most Australians don't care about, and when you ask them who is the current Governor-General, they can never answer the question.
And I have to drive a weird-looking car with a crown on it.
Yeah, and you get to cut ribbons and do speeches that no one watches. So anyway, this is a businesswoman and gender equality advocate, Samantha Mostyn. Now, she has been a businesswoman for a number of years and advocating for women to get more involved in business and, break the glass ceiling, all that kind of thing. She's also said to be a staunch supporter of Indigenous rights. She supported the Yes vote. And she also has said that we should not celebrate Australia Day. So, in other words, she is a political activist. And this was a captain's pick. Of course, the Prime Minister selects who the Governor-General is going to be. And it is widely seen, not wrongly so, as a political pick. So, yeah. But, like I said before, people really don't give a shit about the Governor-General. So, how much influence will she have? Arguably less than what she did in the private sector. So probably not too much to worry about. Okay, that was actually our last story. Well, look at that. We didn't even get to 2.5 hours tonight. We're actually just over 2 hours, a little shorter. So
there we go, a little bit more manageable.
A little bit more manageable, yeah. So, well, guys, we should have another show for you. Actually, no, next week I have to actually do it on the weekend because I've got stuff on all during the week. So, yeah, next episode will probably come to you 1 or 2 days late. Apologies for that. But in the meantime, thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon.